Welcome back, AP Environmental Science. Here we go, human health and environmental risk. When it comes to human disease, humans face a wide range of potential diseases, and we're going to explore some different types of diseases and discuss those factors and make some people more like what makes some people more likely to contract disease versus others, and then discuss the number of diseases that have been important to human history as well as the diseases that have basically become prevalent and plagued us for decades. So after this video, you should be able to identify the different types of human disease, understand the risk factors for what we call human chronic disease, discuss the historically important human diseases, identify what we call like the major infectious diseases or emergent infectious disease, those that are coming about, and let's discuss the future challenges to improve human health. Of all the cases of human deaths worldwide, which we know about, approximately 3/4 of them basically stem from the various types of disease. A disease is an impairment of a function of the body, and that's a characteristic set of symptoms. Uh, Infectious disease causes about 1/4 of the worldwide deaths, and infectious disease are also diseases by infectious agents. We call those pathogens. This includes examples like pneumonia and sexually transmitted diseases. Non-infectious disease are not caused by pathogens, but these also include things like cardiovascular disease and respiratory and digestive disease, and even most cancers. The pathogens that can cause the most infectious diseases are viruses, bacteria, fungus, protists, and there's a large group of parasitic worms. And there's only about 6 different types of diseases that cause about 94% of all the deaths in infectious disease. The 3 most common types of infectious disease are AIDS, a disease that causes respiratory infections, and then anything that causes diarrhea. The next 3 we won't hear about as much in the United States, but they are tuberculosis, malaria, and then childhood diseases like measles and tetanitis. We're going to discuss many of these and their importance later, but all diseases can be categorized as either what we call acute or chronic. Acute disease is a rapidly impairment of the functioning of a person's body, and in some cases, which as a disease like Ebola, hemorrhagic fever, that we'll discuss later, death can come on in just a matter of days. So in contrast to that, there's chronic disease, and that's a slow impairment of functioning of a person's body, like heart disease and most cancers, really. And, for example, like chronic disease that develop over several decades would be considered part of that. Like it would take decades for some cancers to harm your body. So in this figure, you can see the leading causes of deaths in the world. More than 3/4 of all the world deaths are caused by disease, and that's usually respiratory, digestive, various cancers, cardiovascular disease, and infectious. And among all the world's deaths caused by infectious disease, 94% of them are caused by only 6 types of disease. There's a numerous amount of factors that cause people to be at a greater risk for chronic disease like cancer, cardiovascular, diabetes, any sort of chronic infectious disease. And the World Health Organization has found that these risks usually differ substantially between low and high income countries. So here in this figure, we can see the WHO information, the World Health Organization. And if we considered all the deaths that occurred separate to different cases, we're going to examine each category with the highest percentage of death. So the leading health risk for low-income countries include issues usually related to low nutrition and poor sanitation. And in contrast, the leading risk for high-income countries include things like tobacco, inactivity, and obesity, and usually, believe it or not, air pollution. And the data that you're looking at here is from 2009. In low-income countries, the top risk that leads to chronic disease is usually associated with poverty, and that also includes underweight children, unsafe drinking water, poor sanitation, malnutrition, We've looked at some of these factors that contribute to malnutrition, and including political upheaval and even the high cost of fossil fuels, basically lead to an increased food prices. And another example would be like poverty leading into chronic disease. Nearly half of the children in the world under the age 5 who die from pneumonia, it's because they suffer from poor nutrition. So nearly 3/4 of all the children who die from diarrhea are malnourished. And if these children had improved nutrition, then it would be able to fight this infectious disease and likely survive. Like when we get bouts of infectious diarrhea, because we are fully fed properly, we have good nutrition, at least we have the opportunity to have good nutrition, our bodies are able to better fight back those disease. So affluence changes your health risk. And because people in high income countries can afford better nutrition and proper sanitation, fewer of them die when they're young. And especially fewer of them die from things like pneumonia and diarrhea when they're young. Risk factors for chronic disease in high income countries, we've talked about it being tobacco. It's a combination of a less active lifestyle. Poor nutrition and overeating leads to high blood pressure and obesity. So the change of the risk factors between low income and high income countries occur in a given country over time. And a poor country initially faces the challenges of supplying food and proper sanitation to its citizens. But as we accumulate wealth, the risk will change, and it's predictable. And you can see that in the healthcare system. Although diseases can have, genetic causes, environmental scientists are generally interested in the diseases that have environmental causes specifically, especially those that are pathogens like fungus, bacteria, and viruses. These pathogens have evolved a wide range of pathways to infect humans, and they include like transmission through food, water, and even other humans, and actually even other animals, as this figure that you're looking at here demonstrates. Historically, though, disease-causing pathogens have taken a large toll on human health and our mortality for as long as humans have been around. And when a pathogen causes a rapid increase in disease, we call that an epidemic. And when an epidemic occurs over a large geographical region, like an entire continent, we call that a pandemic. And among the diversity of human diseases that have caused epidemics and pandemics, we're going to consider that those that have been historically important are ones that we recently have talked about. So we've looked at several different historical diseases associated with poor sanitation and unsafe drinking water. They were cholera, hepatitis, any type of diarrhea disease. Additionally, historic diseases have also been passed through some sort of host, like a plague, like malaria, and even tuberculosis. During 1656, a plague repeatedly swept through Europe. And it was usually from like the 1300s to the 1800s. This time period killed millions of people. That, if you remember, that disease caused black sores on people's bodies, and it also had the name Black Death. So a plague is caused by an infection from bacterium. It's actually Yersinia pestis, is how that's said, and it's carried by fleas. Basically, how this works is fleas attach to rodents like mice and rats, and it gives the fleas a tremendous amount of mobility. One of the most well-known diseases in human history, plague, it also carried several of its historical names like the bubonic plague and the Black Death. When humans live close contact with mice and rats, that bacterium can be transmitted by either flea bites or by handling rodents themselves. Individuals who become infected often experience like swollen glands and black spots on their skin. It's extremely painful. The plague is estimated to have killed hundreds of millions of people throughout history, including nearly 1/4 of the European population in like the 1300s. The last major pandemic of plague was in Asia, and that was in the early 1900s. So today, there are still occasional small outbreaks of the plague, and they're usually around the world, including southwestern U.S. But modern antibiotics have been highly effective in killing this bacterium to prevent human death. Malaria, that's caused by an infection from several species of protists, and those are usually from Plasmodium. It's a genus of the protist family. And in other widespread diseases that have killed millions of people over centuries, you gotta include malaria in this. The malaria parasite spends one stage of its life cycle inside a mosquito and the other stage of its life inside of a human. Infections cause this reoccurrent like flu-like symptoms over and over again. And each year we see 350 to 500 million people in the world contract the disease. And about 1 million people, mostly children under the age 5, die. The regions that are usually hit hardest are Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and even Central and South America. Even since 1951, the malaria parasite has been eliminated from the U.S. by mosquito eradication programs. And although more than 1,000 cases of malaria are diagnosed in the U.S. each year, these are usually found in people who have returned from regions of the world where the parasite actually lives. And in the traditional approach to combating malaria, with this widespread spraying of insecticides like DDT to eradicate mosquitoes, this eradication effort has proven to be very effective in a lot of parts of the world and very ineffective in other parts. You know, we're going to see later that this widespread use of many insecticides can create new problems. And in the end, working towards sustainability, the global fight against malaria examines the latest approach to combating these types of things. Tuberculosis is a highly contagious disease caused by another bacterium, and it primarily infects the lungs. This Mycobacterium tuberculosis is spread from person to person through like coughing, and it usually expels the bacteria into the air, and then the bacteria can persist in the air for several hours and infect anybody else who inhales them. And these symptoms of infection include like feeling very weak, night sweats, coughing up blood even. As the case with many types of pathogens, a person can be infected by developing tuberculosis just by being around people who had it or where there were people who had it. So it's estimated that 1/3 of the world's population is infected with tuberculosis. Each year, 9 million people develop the disease and 2 million of them die. So taking antibiotics for a year can usually treat most types of tuberculosis infections. In countries that have, like the United States, where these medicines are readily available, there's been a dramatic drop in both the number of new cases and the number of deaths of tuberculosis. So this graph shows the decline in the number of tuberculosis cases in the U.S. since like the 1950s. In fact, 95% of all tuberculosis deaths occur in low and middle income countries, and it's the leading cause of death by disease in the developing world. In these countries, these medicines are not available, or are they even affordable? And those who receive these medicines sometimes do not take it as prescribed, or they won't even take like a full dose for the duration of time that they need to. And when a patient stops taking antibiotics for bacteria, then there are two major consequences for that. First, this pathogen can quickly rebuild its population inside someone's body because, they multiply very quickly. And secondly, because the last few bacteria are generally the most drug resistant and they're the strongest bacteria, basically stopping the antibiotics before the bacteria have been eradicated, you have just now produced a drug resistant strain of bacteria inside of your body. So there are drug-resistant strains of tuberculosis, and it's becoming more and more of a concern because, particularly in parts of the world like Africa and Russia, where like 20% of the people can be infected by tuberculosis, they're also carrying this drug-resistant strain. And these strains are much harder to kill, so they require 100 times more antibiotics and very, very costly antibiotics to kill.